Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. When the urge took hold, serial killer Larry Bright brought women back to his home. After raping and murdering his victims, he brutally disposed of their bodies. Sometimes he built a white-hot fire and burned them in his backyard. Other times he dumped them along nearby roads and fields. For years, Bright had trolled the roads and back streets of Illinois for the most helpless, desperate women he could find. Then one woman escaped, and suddenly police were looking for bodies everywhere, trying to find out how many women Bright had really killed and what he'd done with their remains. Step by step, an all-out investigation would shock hardened detectives. From interviews with women who survived their encounters with him to the forensic search for bone fragments and pieces of burned, buried flesh, the case against Larry Bright finally closed like a vice on the man who turned his victims into ashes. Bone Crusher with my special guest, Linda Rosencrance. Thank you very much for agreeing to this program, and welcome back to the program, Linda Rosencrance.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you. First off, what made you decide to write about this killer and this case in particular?
Well, my publisher always tells me that readers like to read about serial killers. And in my research, I came across this case, and I was fascinated. He killed, 8 women, and I thought, what would make someone do such a thing? And just got involved in it and went from there.
Now, the story of Bone Crusher is set in Peoria, Illinois. And
right.
Tell us where that is in relation to Chicago. And from your research, what type of community is Peoria? What is it best known for? And after that, you can tell us about what's really featured in this book is also the low track that's featured in this, the place where the most vulnerable women are available in Peoria. So tell us a little bit about that. Set the scene for us, please.
Sure. Peoria is about 165 miles south of Chicago. It's between Chicago and St. Louis. And it's a blue-collar community, blue-collar city, industrial. Industry started there. There was pork industry and flour mills, and it has universities, and it's always been known as sort of a typical American city. And the phrase "Will it play in Peoria?" I'm sure folks have heard that. Originated there because it was such a typical city. In the 20s and 30s, vaudeville acts would go to Peoria and try their acts out, and if it worked in Peoria, they figured it would work across the country.
Right.
So it has everything. There's affordable housing, there's great schools, colleges, medical facilities, arts, but as I mentioned in my book, there's a seedier side to the city, and it's a place that's just inhabited by prostitutes and drug addicts and people like Larry Bright who preyed on them.
Right. Now, Larry Bright is a central figure of this story. Tell us about his life growing up, and tell us about his mother, Shirley, and their relationship from what you could find. Right.
Well, he was born in California, and then the family moved to a city in Illinois, Morton, and his parents divorced when he was young, and his father really wasn't in his life until he was maybe in high school. So he was really a mama's boy. She would do anything for him, and he would do anything for her. He was the type of kid in high school, got in trouble, liked to party, do drugs, involved in burglaries, fights, ended up in prison. So, he didn't have a great upbringing at all. No one really there, no real male role model anyway.
And what was, from his friends that grew up with him, what type of personality, other than getting in trouble, was he a person that had a lot of friends despite his criminal leanings? What kind of personality was he?
Well, he did. I mean, he had some friends, not a whole lot, but he just liked to party. They would go into the woods. There were various camping sites where they would just go and do drugs and drink and party, and that was pretty much what his life was growing up.
How was he with women? Did he have early relationships with girls? What was his relationships with women like when he was young and growing up as a teenager?
I don't know that. I wasn't able to find that out. I tried wanted to talk with his mother, but she called me back and decided not to. So I don't really know about his relationships when he was in high school.
Now, you're talking about Larry Bright as a young man in his 20s, early or late teens. Now, what was his personality like? You said he liked to party, but what was his idea of did he frequent prostitutes at an early age? From all the information you got,
no, it doesn't seem like at an early age. And I'm not exactly sure when that started. It probably started maybe in his later 20s, I would think, after he was in prison for burglary and after he got out of prison, I think. I mean, he had a serious relationship, several of them, as a matter of fact, and he was married and no children of his own, although one woman told him that they had a son, but the son really wasn't his, and he was devastated to find that out. So it's really unclear when he started, because he told so many stories that it just wasn't clear what to believe.
Now, you talked about drug use and partying, and we were talking about crack cocaine. So
yes.
This is a drug problem much evolved if you're resorting to crack cocaine rather than some other drugs. So from your research, when did he seem to be seriously doing crack cocaine, and around what age and what time of his life was he doing this?
I think I would say it was probably, I think he started that early on. I mean, they started smoking marijuana, and then I think they went into cocaine, maybe in his early 20s.
Right.
He was a pretty hardened drug user.
Now, what did he do for employment? What was his interest in?
Well, he did sort of odd jobs. He built barns and dismantled barns and did brickwork and yard work, whatever he could find. No discernible skills that I could determine.
Now, what was his relationship with his mother, and where did he live, and under what circumstances?
He lived with his mother throughout most of his life, except when he was married. They lived at one house in Illinois, and then in Peoria, and then he lived in the basement. And then when they bought the house at which he murdered the women, he was living in sort of a makeshift garage type apartment. No kitchen, bathroom, one large room and a bathroom. And his mother lived in a larger house in the front.
From everything that you've learned in writing this book, what was the mother like? What was her life like?
Her life wasn't easy. There was insinuations that at one point in her life she was a prostitute, no one ever proved that, so it's really unclear. But she seemed like a hard-working, really nice woman who had no idea what her son was doing. I'm not sure if it's that she didn't think he could do anything wrong, or she just didn't have a clue about what he was doing.
Now, you said he was married to someone. What was that marriage like? How long did it last? What was it characterized by? Did you find out anything about that marriage?
It wasn't. I don't think it lasted very long. And I'm sorry. There were so many things involved that I don't remember everything. But he was abusive to the women he was with. As a matter of fact, I think one of them was pregnant, and he claims he was defending himself, but he hit her, and she had to go to the hospital. And I'm sorry, I don't remember if she lost the baby or not, but
yes, I think
she did. Right. So he was an abusive personality. So it didn't last very long.
Now, a lot of stuff starts happening in Peoria in the low track. There is a woman named Linda Fields that was found dead on February 24th, 2000. Now, how was she?
Wisconsin.
Pardon me?
In Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, okay. Now, how was she killed, and what was her relationship to Larry Bright? And
Larry dated her, and her body was found. She had been strangled, and her body was dumped under a tree near her home on Lake Avenue, and she was just wearing a nightgown, and her shoes were next to her. And Larry, coincidentally or not, moved back to Peoria the same month her body was found. Now, Larry, in his interviews with police, he says he killed her. He said he didn't kill her. He said he doesn't remember. He said he has visions where he killed her. Maybe they're dreams. He just doesn't know. So her death was never attributed to him.
Now, you're getting a little bit ahead, so I just wanted to make sure that with this Larry Bright, was he a person at least of interest? Did police at least question him at that time?
Not at the time, no. Not until he had been arrested for the murders in Peoria.
Okay. Now, we'll jump ahead a little bit to March 21st or March of 2001, or March 21st, 2001, and what occurred that day?
That, I think, if I remember, it was the day that Ken Givens heard some dirt bikers yelling something in a field, and apparently they had found a body of a woman, and that was Wanda Jackson.
Right.
And she was one of the first bodies found. But ultimately, they could never connect Larry to her murder.
Right. Now, you include in Bone Crusher talk of serial killer Joseph Miller as well as other serial killers. Why include Miller and other serial killers, and why are they an important part of your story? Well,
Miller had killed women in Chicago, and he had been in prison for 15 years and then got out and murdered three or four more women in Peoria in 1993.
Wow.
He was found guilty in 94 of murdering 3 Peoria prostitutes. And so police were finding bodies of other women, but then discovered that they were probably connected to him rather than to Larry. So, they were finding bodies. But the reason I included other serial killers is because they all, well, I can't say all, but they sort of do similar things and prey on similar people. They prey on the most vulnerable, the people they think no one is going to miss. So that's sort of why I include them, and also to show. And Miller, actually, it was the first time that DNA evidence was used in Peoria County to convict a murderer. They
right.
analyzed the DNA in the blood and connected him to the women.
Yeah, and it also there's real evidence that it's quite the phenomenon when you can name 2 or 3 serial killers, or there's suspicion of 2 or 3 serial killers
in one place
in a small area outside
right.
of Chicago.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. A lot more prevalent than people think. Okay, now on July 27, 2003, Sabrina Payne was found.
Right.
Who was she, and how did she die?
Well, they were all African American women, and she was found in a cornfield in Tremont Township in Tazewell County. The bodies were disposed of in Peoria and Tazewell County, and she was like the other women on the street, selling their bodies for drugs. I would say most of these women were drug addicts more so than prostitutes. They were only into prostitution to pay for their drug habits. All they wanted
right.
to do was get high. And
sure.
And so she was dumped in this cornfield.
Right. Now, not too many months later, February 5th, 2004, another victim is found. And who do police find?
Barbara Williams, a gentleman who was on the way to drive his wife to work, saw the body of a woman in the snow. And he went and called police. Was this the one in the snow? Yep, she was in the snow. She was partially clothed. Her feet were in the roadway. And when police were called, they thought that maybe she had been dragged from one place to another.
Now, these women so far have been strangled?
Yes, all of them.
Is there
two so far?
Is there anything that the killer left as in terms of how he strangled them? Is there any evidence? Are there any similarities so far with any of these victims, other than they're black prostitutes from the low track?
No.
Now, 2 weeks later, incredibly, Fredericka Brown is discovered. And who is she, and how is she discovered?
They found her, again, lying in the snow in Peoria County, but a man driving an all-terrain vehicle found her near Hannah City. And she had been strangled. She was dumped about 30 feet from the roadway. She was wearing a coat and jeans and a shirt, and they weren't sure if she had been walking in the area, but she had been there for a number of months. They thought she was there for a while, and she had lived with her boyfriend, who was also addicted to drugs, and she had 3 children who were in foster care, and another person with a hard life. She'd been arrested for prostitution, battery, robbery, and another woman. Ultimately, like Wanda Jackson, did we get to Wanda Jackson? I'm sorry. But Larry was not connected to this. They couldn't connect him. Police ultimately they think he murdered her, but he never confessed to her. He never confessed to 2 of the women. So the police found 10 women over this period of time, but Larry only confessed to murdering 8 of them.
Now, by this time, we're into February 2004, and there's been these a bunch of victims. And what is the press's response? Is it high profile? What is going on in Peoria in terms of the media, and what's going on with the police? Is there a task force set up yet?
Not the task force isn't set up yet. Obviously the more bodies they find, the more they're thinking maybe these are connected. And I'm sorry, but I'm not. I think the media obviously or not. I think that they're sort of involved in this, but there's not a lot of media attention, if I recall, at the moment.
Right.
There were obviously newspaper articles in the Peoria Journal-Star, each time a body was found, but no one was connecting them yet.
Right, and the police certainly weren't, so.
Right.
Okay, so we jump ahead to August 22nd, and a woman named Lawler is found, and who was she and how was she found? Is it similar or is there some differences?
Differences. Larry disposed of 8 of his victims with intact bodies. 4 of them, including Laura, he burned. And so police didn't find her on August 22nd. She was reported missing on August 22nd. But police didn't find her body because there was no body to find. Larry built a fire in his backyard and burned these women. And then after the fire died down, he would take what remained of their bones and crush them, hence the name Bone Crusher. And then he would scoop up the bone and ash in pails or buckets, actually big frosting buckets that his mother got when she worked at a local supermarket, and dispose of the remains at various places around Peoria and Tazewell County. He disposed of some of the bones in his grandmother's yard. Larry ultimately confessed and said that he strangled her and burned her body and then just dumped the remains. So police didn't know about her at this point.
Right,
She was just reported missing.
Okay, now there are some people that come forward and very interesting characters so that the police have some idea who Larry Bright is because he's not on their radar initially.
Right.
What happens, there are some characters, Vicki Bomar, there is another woman named Tiffany Hughes. Who is Vicki Bomar, by the way?
Vicki Bomar was a woman, she's ultimately the woman who testified against Larry in court at a hearing, and they got an indictment. He kidnapped her, raped her, took her back to his house, probably would have done to her what he did to the rest of them, murdered her, but she locked herself in the bathroom, and he tried to get her out, and finally he said, if you just come out, I'll take you home, and she didn't have much choice. Now,
right.
What it seemed was when the women who fought the hardest, he let go for whatever reason.
Sure.
Maybe it just, I don't know. I can't get into his head, but she got away, and he said, all right, I'll take you back. But when they were walking to his truck, she saw a neighbor of his, and she ran over to the woman and said, he just tried to rape me, he wanted to kill me, and the woman said, let me call the police, and she said, no, just take me home. And so Vicki, she didn't tell anybody.
Right.
She didn't go to the police. But after all these murders started happening, Tiffany went to the police Tiffany went to the police and said that another woman, she also had been raped and kidnapped by Larry. And then someone went to the police and said, maybe you should talk to Vicki Bomar because she told me the same thing happened.
Right. Now, who is Tiffany Hughes?
Tiffany Hughes was another woman who was taken by Larry, and her story appeared in the Peoria Journal-Star. And so, she said, I was kidnapped by this guy. He tried to kill me, and so they ran her story. And after Vicki Bomar's friend, I think, saw that story, they went to police and said, or just hearing more about the murders, the friend said, you should talk to Vicki because she said the exact same thing. But Vicki didn't go to the police initially because she had a warrant out for her arrest.
Right.
And so she was afraid to go because she was afraid she would be arrested.
And in that interim, there were other victims. We'll go through some of the other victims, but it was Shirley Ann Trapp
Right.
Carpenter.
Yep.
There was Tamara Tammy Walls.
Right.
There is also everything really seems to get started after Linda Neal's discovery, and then the task force tried to link her death with 5 other black
Right.
prostitutes from the Peoria and Tazewell County area.
Right.
Now, tell us a little bit about that task force. I just mentioned it's after Linda Neal's body's discovery. Tell us a little bit about the task force, what its purpose is, what they think they're going to see, and they are trying to link these murders together, or they think they can.
Well, I think that they thought at this point that they probably were connected. So there was a task force that consisted of members of the Peoria County Sheriff's Office, the Peoria Police Department, and the Tazewell County Sheriff's Office, as well as some people from the Illinois State Police. And this is all they would work on. They got some 1,000 tips into the hotline, and they would rank the tips, serious, not so serious, something we should look into, and that's all they worked on with these cases. And in fact, Larry called in a tip on himself.
Wow.
Because he wanted to stop and knew he couldn't do it on his own, and he called and said, I think you should look into Larry Bright. He's probably the one doing this.
And what did police do as a result of that?
Well, it was around the same time, I think, that Vicki had told them about him, and she picked his photo out of a photo array, and so he was already on their radar screen, and they arrested him for kidnapping Vicki.
Now, who are Tyresia and Teresita, and what did they say to police?
2 more women also who were held by Larry and raped against their will, and one of them, as a matter of fact, actually it was Tiffany who had gone with Larry, and she was with Linda Neal, and Larry drove by and didn't remember her, but she remembered him. And she said to Linda, "Don't go with him. He's crazy." But Linda, she's not sure if Linda ever did, but the next day is when they found her body. So it's obvious that she did go with him. But the other women were also taken by Larry and talked to the police. People, one person or another would say, I think you should talk to so-and-so, or I think you should talk to so-and-so. I'm sorry, I've just got this a little confused. Teresia was a friend of Brenda Irving's, whom we haven't gotten to either.
Right.
She was in prison, and she said she wanted to talk to police, and she gave them the names of people who might be involved with these murders, but they weren't. So I really apologize because it's so hard to keep all these straight. But Teresita was taken by Larry when he lived at the house on his second house. He went to his house, and no, I'm sorry again. He took her when he was living on McClure Road, not where he murdered all the other women, not where he murdered the women, and he brought her to his basement and raped her and let her go. He was living in his mother's basement at that point. And he would tell these women, he told her, too, that he was a police officer. And so, he told them not to go to the police because no one would believe them because he was a cop.
Right.
So no one would believe what they had to say.
Now, as a result of speaking with all these women, Teresia and Teresita, Vicki Bomar, and Tiffany Hughes, and other other people as well as some of Larry Bright's friends from the past. What happens on November 11th, and what do they try to charge Larry Bright with initially? They
charged him with kidnapping Vicki Bomar. That's
right.
how they first arrested him.
Was there also some drug charges, possession of a controlled substance, cocaine as well?
I'm sure. I just don't remember. I'm sorry.
Right.
But yes, but they arrested him mainly for her, for kidnapping her. And then when they searched his house, they found drugs.
I see. Okay. Now the thing is that they're searching his house, but they are trying to question Larry Bright. Now, how does he cooperate? What is his demeanor? How does Larry Bright respond to being picked up and arrested for anything?
He was calm. He was glad. I really do think he was glad. He wanted it over. He couldn't stop doing it himself. I mean, all his interviews with police, I looked at all the tapes, the DVDs. He was joking with them, laughing like they were friends. I think he was just relieved that it was over.
Now, what does AIDS have to do with this story?
Well, Larry thought he had AIDS. He was involved in a relationship with a former prostitute who had AIDS, and he thought that she had given him AIDS, and there was speculation that he was murdering these other women to sort of in revenge for what she did to him.
Right.
I'm not sure that was true, but it turns out he did not have AIDS. He was tested finally when he was arrested, and he did not have AIDS at all. So, did he believe he did? I think he believed he did, but and he never said he was murdering them because this woman Ernestine had given him AIDS. That was just pure speculation.
I see. Now, how does he? Does he cooperate or not cooperate with police initially?
Oh my gosh, he cooperates. Yeah, I did it, and I'll take you to the bodies. And the remains, not the bodies. They had the 4 bodies. I'll take you to the remains. And so, they drove around with him. They stopped at McDonald's or Burger King and got him lunch, fries and burgers, and he drove them to all the sites. And
now
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, part of the agreement was, though, that they not search his mother's grounds, and the police cooperated.
Well, not so much the mother's grounds. He didn't care about anything else except the fish pond that he had built for her.
Okay.
It was an elaborate fish pond, and it had really expensive, I think, koi in it. And he was so concerned. He said, "Don't dig up the pond, please. She didn't know anything about this. There's nothing there." And so they said fine, they wouldn't dig it up. Ultimately, they had to, and they brought the fish to some wildlife preserve or something because he was really worried about the fish.
Sure, that's nice of him. Compassionate of him, after all.
Right.
So he's cooperative. He doesn't ask for a lawyer right away, or he wants to tell
his mother, and she got him a lawyer. But Larry really didn't do. The lawyer said don't talk, but Larry would send notes from jail to the cops and say, I want to talk, and they said, but your lawyer says not to, and he said, I don't care, and he would just sign away his rights and talk to them, tell them everything they wanted to know.
So what did it all entail? What did he tell police? What's the details that he gave? What's the motive he gave? What did he tell police in the end, and how many murders did he confess to?
Okay, well, he said it all went back to the crack cocaine, and after a while he started hearing voices.
Sure.
When he wasn't smoking the crack, he was fine. But once he did that, he'd hear the voices that said, kill, kill. And initially, he would just go out and he wouldn't go out looking for anyone. He would just pick someone up, and then the voices would say, kill. But then after a while, he went hunting. And he knew from the outset that he was going to get someone and murder someone. And he just said it was the voices, and he couldn't stop the voices. But he wanted it to stop.
Okay. And how many does he admit? How many women does he admit?
What he admitted to and what he was ultimately convicted of are two different things. He also admitted to murdering 2 or 3 women in other parts of the country. He got a settlement. He hurt his back at work, and he got like a $10,000 or $15,000 settlement. And he went on a cross-country trip, and he went to Arizona and some place, I don't remember where his father's family had come from. His father had since passed away from cancer. And he claimed he murdered women in Arizona and a woman in whatever state it was, I just don't remember, and another one, I think, either in Oregon or Washington. But the police could never, the police in Peoria contacted the police in those other states, but they could never find anything to connect Larry to anything. So I don't know, did he make it up? Did he really do it? It's very unclear. And as I said, the sheriff thinks that Wanda Jackson and Fredericka Brown died at the hands of Larry Bright, but Larry only confessed to 8 women, not those 2. And he kept saying, they kept saying, well, or he kept saying, if I murdered them, why wouldn't I tell you?
Right.
They're not sure about Linda Fields, as I said, because he just kept saying, I had a dream, I did it, I didn't do it. But they think he didn't confess to her because he would have had to have he was afraid of going to Wisconsin because he didn't want to be tried there. I'm not sure if they would have sought the death penalty there or it was going to be far from his mother. And the police kept telling him, look, we have 8, they have 1. You're going to be here, so don't worry about it. Right. But he never confessed ultimately to murdering her. He said, yeah, I think I did. No, I didn't. I'm not sure. So he never really confessed.
No, he admits to 8.
Right.
And then how does the judicial system proceed from there?
Well, there's a couple. Before we go to the judicial system, there's an interesting. As I mentioned, he burned 8 bodies and dumped 4 intact, which is very unusual. Serial killers usually do one thing. They usually, just kill and dispose of their victims the same way. And so police thought that Larry had there was some strange reason behind this. But in Larry's mind, it was all very logical. So the police said, why did you not burn these 4 women? And he said, because my mother was having company or my grandmother was coming over and I couldn't light the fire. So it was just a matter of convenience. That he burned the bodies. But it was also unusual that nobody smelled anything in the neighborhood. His mother said, they asked his mother, and she said, yes, I smelled something strange, but he told me it was plastic.
Right.
And he was always burning leaves or brushes, so no one in the neighborhood thought anything of it either.
Incredible. So
I'm sorry.
So there was a few areas. You say there was the one burn area, and then there was where he dumped the ashes was by the Kickapoo County.
Oh, he dumped them in various places. As I said, some in his grandmother's yard, places that he had gone to as a child, when he was younger, when he partied as a teenager, places that he knew well. And he would drive his car and then, park the car and take these buckets and just dump the remains on the way. And then in one place he threw the buckets in the stream. There was really no rhyme, no reason to where he decided to dump them.
Yeah, so it must have been a horrific job for the anthropologist and the forensic people to go through the remains.
Oh my gosh, it was, and they were only able to connect a jawbone. I think it was to Barbara Williams. Actually, no, I think it was Tammy Walls. She had surgery, and so that was the biggest piece of bone that they found. I mean, these were just ash, little pieces of bone. There was no way they could identify any of the other bones through DNA or otherwise.
Now there was initially that Larry Bright wanted a deal. He wanted to plead guilty, but he also wanted some kind of deal.
Well, no, he wanted to plead guilty. And the judge wouldn't let him. He said, I just want to say I did this. He wanted the death penalty off the table. But that wasn't the reason that he couldn't plead guilty. The judge wouldn't let him because he wanted to make sure that he conferred with his attorney. He wanted to make sure he got the right advice. He tried twice to plead guilty, and the judge wouldn't accept his plea.
Right.
And then there was talk about a trial. He decided he was going to have a trial, and then ultimately he decided he wanted to spare his mother all that pain. So he said, I'm going to plead guilty again. And the DA talked to the families and said, he wants a death penalty off the table. He'll plead guilty. Are you willing to go along with that? And they were. They said we want him punished, and life in prison, was okay with them.
Yeah, I thought it was remarkable that the district attorney actually was seriously considering what the family wanted in this respect.
Right.
I thought that was pretty admirable. Kind of unusual. So
absolutely.
Incredible. So basically, the trial wasn't much because it's just
there wasn't a
counting.
Trial. There was no trial. He just pleaded guilty, and the DA just went through, each
just
victim.
a hearing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and what was the attendance like at the trial? Did some of the victims' families show up?
Some of them did, right, at the hearing or the
hearing, sure.
Right. Some showed up. I'm not sure all of them did. I couldn't. It was hard to track them down. I talked to a couple of families, but I dialed more disconnected numbers than I think I've dialed in my whole life.
Sure.
It was just the kind. Not all their families lived the kind of life the women did, but they're not well-off people. They move a lot. They don't have phones, and it was really hard to get in touch with all of them. I wanted to, and I also wanted to talk to Larry's mother, but she just, she said, "Let me think about it," and she just couldn't. I want to say something, and I'm not sure if you or your listeners will think there's something wrong with me for saying this, but
I don't.
I saw all his tapes when he confessed, and in the beginning, he said to the police, "I want to make a tape for my mother. I want to talk to her. Can I do that?" And they said yes. They said, "But anything you say can be used against you." And he said, "That's fine." And so they went out of the room, and he made this tape. And I have to tell you, this was my fourth book. He's the fourth murderer that I've written about, and I truly believe that he was remorseful. He was the only one of the four murderers that I've written about that I think showed an ounce of remorse.
Okay.
I think he was truly sorry, and I actually felt myself responding to him in some odd way. You know, I thought he's deep down, I think he was a really nice guy. As strange as that sounds, he murdered 8 women, but he wasn't, he didn't want to do it. I really don't think he wanted to do it. It's drugs. It really was the drugs, I believe.
Well, I don't know if I can agree with you, but you were there. So you and you know the thing is, I know what you're saying, because I think this is an unusual case because he really did want to unburden himself, and he didn't seem like a publicity hound with it.
No.
And he when you're trying to plead guilty and you're getting advice, I mean, it does show something, because it certainly is unusual for even the most guilty people to do what he was willing to do. So
right.
I don't know about voices in the head, but something compelled him to do what he did over and over again.
But I believe, but he was truly sorry. None of the other three that I've written about, one of whom was also a serial killer, 2, which was spouse-on-spouse murder, I don't think any of them were sorry. They were sorry they got caught, but they were not sorry for what they did. I think he really was sorry. I mean, I don't know that doesn't do much good for anyone.
No.
But I could feel that from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well, I mean, I don't know, blame it on the drugs, but certainly he was on those drugs, and certainly drugs have a profound effect on certain people. You know, he didn't come forward necessarily, but there is some merit to cooperating with police, at least for the victims, showing, you know, trying to show them where the disposal sites were. Didn't have to do that if he was pure evil. So
right, and as I mentioned, he did call in a tip on himself.
Yeah,
he couldn't come forward because he didn't want to hurt his mother. That was, you know, he felt she didn't deserve a son like him, and he didn't want to cause her any pain, and he thought that was a way to do it. But he was sorry. He was sorry for murdering the women. He was sorry to their families. He was sorry that she had to live with what he did. He really was sorry.
And you saw that see, the thing is, if you saw it later on is one thing. It could be possibly contrived, but if you saw it in the confession to police itself.
In the beginning, in one of his first confessions.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It wasn't after. It wasn't contrived. And it was just him and the video camera. And he was talking to his mother. And it was as if she was sitting across from him.
Right.
And he was sobbing. I mean, and you know, none of it was contrived. He was truly, truly sorry. And I know your listeners will probably think, you know, I should be in a loony bin or something, but I felt that emotion from him. Mm-hmm. You know, I knew that deep down this man just was so sorry for the pain he caused everyone.
You know what I thought was another interesting aspect of this story, and I guess it's just a bit of a commentary, but it's the last few stories that I've talked about on my program, starting with the Stevie Cameron and On the Farm about Robert Pickton in British Columbia. It's almost the same story of 3 or 4 of the last stories, in that you have a section of people that are the most vulnerable. The prostitute that is plying their trade on the street. These weren't young women, these were older women, which I found interesting as well. But they're increasingly even more vulnerable among this group of people because they're willing to go into a car for drugs. They have this intense need for the drug, and it's usually crack or something like that. And so they'll take even more increasing risks. So people always wonder, well, how did they rack up these big numbers if these women were disappearing and it's some of their friends and co-workers? And really what it was is that people are that desperate.
Right, and he knew that, actually, because he would say to them, he wouldn't say, you know, let's have sex or whatever. He would say, do you want to get high? Sure. And they did, and that's all they wanted to do.
Yeah. It's So.
And I mean, women were disappearing, but it didn't matter to them. The need to get high was so great that they had to do it. They couldn't stop.
Right. Now, Larry Bright, what was his sentence? What did he receive?
Oh, he's life in prison, never getting out.
He's never going to get out.
No, not ever.
And his appeals have been exhausted, have they?
That was part of it. There were no appeals.
That's right.
That was
too.
part of the deal.
I thought that was interesting too. To again save some people because it's not like you get any closure. That's a misnomer. But I mean, for appeal to just hang around. I know the case I was just involved with. The appeal just finished. It's 7.5 years later. So
my first book, in 1998, the murder happened. His appeals just ended like a month ago.
Yeah.
I mean, and there may be one more. I don't know. You're right, but he didn't want to appeal. He just said no. I just want this over.
Mm-hmm.
I did it. I want to plead guilty. I just want it over.
Yeah, incredible. And was there any real response from them? I know the mother and Larry were very close. Did she do some media? Was there any update on her? Did she? I
don't know. She did. She talked to the media after, and people were following her when she was going to visit him. I think it was hard on her.
Sure.
And I felt really badly for her when I talked to her. She asked me what the title of my book was going to be, and I was like horrified that I actually had to tell her. She didn't do anything. She thought she was raising her kids the right way, but she had no control over what happened. So it wasn't easy for her, obviously.
You bring up an interesting point. The conversation you had with his mother. What did she say when? It's almost like the Capote moment when the inmate finds out what the title of the book is called. In Cold Blood. Now, Bone Crusher. Obviously, there's not much. Doesn't seem to be any seeming sympathy for her son. What did she say? How did she respond?
She didn't say a word. She didn't say a word about it.
Wow.
She just asked me what I was going to call it, and I hesitated a long while, and then just told her. She didn't say anything. But I have to tell you, I said to her, I think he must have been a good guy. And she said he was.
Okay.
And there wasn't much else I could say to her.
Yeah, it's always the classic. The mother's still visiting the killer's son in prison, or at least keeping course. It's amazing. The mother's, loyalty and love never ends.
Right.
For most of these people, anyway. It's
incredible.
Absolutely not. Of all the serial killer stories that I've covered, it's incredible how many families still support their brothers and sisters and people accused of these horrendous crimes. So,
right.
Incredible. So, what are you working on now? We were talking earlier. What
yes,
are you working on now?
I've just started my fifth book. It's called The Killer Debutante. It's about a woman named Kelly Cannon from Nashville who was a debutante growing up, cheerleader, debutante. She had gone to medical school. She married a doctor, and he was divorcing her and threatening to take the kids, and she wasn't going to let that happen, so she strangled him with the cord of a cell phone charger, and they were separated at this point, and dragged his body into a closet and put this big dresser in front of it and left it for the poor maid to find 2 days later.
Wow. And when's the arrival date for this book?
Oh, probably it's usually like every 2 years. I've just started this one, so I would say a year and a half to 2 years that one will be out.
Right. Now, and where are you located in America?
I'm just outside Boston, about 13 miles west of Boston.
And have you, in your books, have you covered anything from that area itself?
Yeah, my first book, as I was mentioning, the person whose appeal just ended was a doctor, world-renowned allergist, Dirk Greineder, and he murdered his wife in a in a park near their home. He had sort of this seedy life. He was visiting prostitutes and having an online sex life, and apparently she found out and was going to divorce him. That's the theory, and so he murdered her. And it claims he didn't, but the evidence is just absolutely convincing that he was guilty. So I think, one of the last of his appeals anyway was he just was denied a new trial about a month ago.
Right. Now, just for our audience, sometimes curious, as some people have asked me to, ask this question, how did you get involved in true crime in the first place?
This
Writing
is
about true
interesting.
crime.
I used to read Anna Rule all the time.
Oh, right.
And I'm a writer. I'm a reporter. I'm a writer. I've been a reporter since the late 80s. And one day I said, I can do that. And so I found that case I was just telling you about. I put together a proposal. I found an agent, and she found my publisher. And this all happened in a month.
Wow.
And I hadn't written a word. I had something else I could show the publisher. And so we signed a contract, and then I went, oh, my God, I have to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I've been with them ever since. And this is, now I'm starting my 5th book.
So that was still with Pinnacle in Kensington.
Exactly, yep.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, great company. I've seen the company really rise in the last few years as well. In the last about 5 years, you see St. Martin's Press was really big, and there's the 5 majors, and then Kensington comes along and is competing with everybody.
Absolutely.
And really is a close number 2. I see in the bookstores. It's all Kensington.
Right.
Some of the really good authors are now getting published with them, and they're covering some of the best stories, and I really like their criteria. True crime readers want to read the most sensational stories, so that's what Kensington does. So it's
absolutely great. It's interesting the criteria. They sent me. It has to be only certain parts of the country. And they like serial killers, teenage murderers. Right.
Kids to kill. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, there's people. Like I asked a question once. I said, if you really looked at the crimes that were in cold blood, that's the crimes itself, especially these days, wouldn't be that high profile. Just escalation of crime in general. That it's not like it's not an interesting story, but it is a less shocking story. Stuff like that goes on almost every day in America.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. But I think it was the way Capote wrote it. It was sort of he's fictionalized it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I think it was his writing style that propelled that book as well.
Well, I think, what would happen is something that wouldn't happen now. You can imagine that if you had a publisher that was willing to give you enough money to hire a really good lawyer to sustain the person's life now that they had the death penalty, that they were gonna hang.
Right.
So he had enough money from the publisher, and he was such an esteemed author that the publisher paid for the legal representation, and then also he paid the warden so he could be there almost every day. So he had unprecedented access.
Right.
Plus he paid for the guy's lawyer so that he would stay alive and he could befriend him in a way that you and I could never do.
Right.
And then he fictionalized everything.
Right.
So, it's I think it's a good lesson in marketing. How's it true crime with some of the devices that he did? It's a great book, of course, but
right.
He bent the rules and no one else got to do the same. So
right, and I don't think that would ever happen now.
No, I think you have to take notes now, and he with 97% recollection rate. Nobody's going to take your word on that.
Right.
So. But at least it got true crime at that time, like in '65. I guess. A popular genre all of a sudden, so we can always thank him for that.
Thank him. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much, Linda, for coming on my program once again. Another great book and another great interview. We've been talking about your latest true crime classic, soon to be classic, I'm sure, Bone Crusher. And I just want to tell our audience you've been listening to Linda Rosencrance and her book, Bone Crusher. Go out and get it. He destroyed their lives, then their bodies. Bone Crusher. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thanks,
Have yourself
Dan.
a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with your host, Dan Zupaski. Have a good evening.